I kind of do things that maybe a little bit differently. I spend a lot of time going out to House offices and meeting with people. Some senators have this tendency to want to hold court and hold meetings in their office, and I think there's an appropriate time for that. But I like spending a lot of time walking the halls on the other side. As a matter of fact, I was on the House floor during the health care vote last week, talking with some of the members, thanking them for their leadership and moving things forward. We got to move forward. They made a decision. They produced an outcome. And Richard was one of those people who was probably, like many others, who would have liked something different before them, but he knew that we had to produce an outcome because it's one of these outcomes that we promised the American people, and it's a problem we have to fix. That position alone tells you a lot about him. It tells you that he has courage. He knows that he's going to be criticized for that, but he's here for the right reasons. He's there for the right reasons. His beautiful wife now is actually in the White House, if y'all don't know that. Are working with the First Lady. And he says that now their conversations have gotten really short because she won't tell him anything that goes on in her day job. But Richard's become a good friend, and he's a hard worker. And of course, he has a long list of experience, far more experience than I am in the ways of Capitol Hill and the ways of politics, to be honest with you. So I want to thank Richard for his leadership. I want to thank him for his sense of humor. And I want to thank him for the opportunity for us to work together in the area that he serves in the state. But most of all, I want to thank you for your service to the citizens of North Carolina. My colleague, Richard Hudson.
Thank you so much. That was a really nice introduction, Tom. I think it's because I reminded him before he got up here that I get to speak after he speaks. And so, but Tom, thank you for your great leadership in Washington. I hear all the time people say, God, this new senator from North Carolina, he gets it. He's a real person. He's working hard. He's effective. And, of course, we all know that because we've seen your leadership here in North Carolina. And I just appreciate your friendship. And I'll tell you, a lot of people don't know about this man's heart, but when he travels in and out of the airport every week, he actually stops at the USO. He's probably mad at me for telling you this now, and visits with the soldiers who stop at the USO while they're traveling. And he doesn't tell anybody that. He doesn't get any press for it. But it shows the kind of heart this man has, and I really appreciate it. So thanks for the nice introduction. Jim Duncan, great to see you. You've been a good friend, and I appreciate that invocation. It's important that we, I think, start any event like this reminding us that God's in charge, and I appreciate you doing that for us. Mike Stewart, my former roommate, good to see you, buddy. Always a pleasure to be with you and your family. And Mark Walker, I want to just mention my colleague. If you don't know Congressman Mark Walker, you need to take time to get to know him. He's a remarkable man. Like Tom and me, he way overmarried. But he has been such an effective member of Congress and also stayed true to his principles in the mold of Jesse Helms. And in fact, the health care bill wouldn't have happened in the House if it weren't for the leadership of Mark Walker. Mark's the one who facilitated the discussions between Tuesday Group and Freedom Caucus. He's the one that continued to push for them to get together and talk. He really was the behind-the-scenes hidden facilitator, moderator, and so I appreciate that leadership, Mark. And then one other person back here, Lauren Brown from Montgomery County, stand up. She's really active in the Teenage Republicans. She's also my constituent, so I'm proud of her. Thank you for being here. And really, I could probably go table to table and talk about so many friends I've got here and the relationships we've had through the years and what you've done for me. And I just will say thank you to all of you. It's always an honor for me to be with John and the Helms Center crew. It's really one of my great honors is the fact that for most of my term I represented Jesse Helms' hometown and Wingate University and the Helms Center. And the way things are going, that they may be back in my district next week, who knows. But Senator Helms was, I consider to be a role model. He's someone who I try to emulate. He's someone I admire greatly. And his dear wife, Mrs. Helms, who we all miss greatly, was chairman of my first campaign. And I can't tell you how much that meant to me personally that she would stand with me. but sure miss her strength and her humor that she would try to hide behind the steel, but always came out in the warmth. She was really meant a lot to me, and I'm thinking of her today. But Senator Helms is somebody who never compromised his principles as a conservative, especially when it came to foreign policy and trade. So I think it's so fitting that today, as we look forward to what is the future in these areas, how should we as conservatives focus on these topics, that we ground ourselves in Senator Helms and his principles and his philosophies. Lots changed since he left the Senate in 2003. But with President Trump's election last year, I think it's a great idea to kind of look back to where we came from as we figure out where we're going forward. And that's frankly why I keep Senator Helms' bust on my desk. That's why I've got his photos on the wall in my office, because I think it's so important, again, that we look back as we look forward. To say our country faces difficult challenges right now is an understatement. From North Korea's aggression and Kim Jong-un's erratic behavior to Russia, and whatever meddling happened and however that's going to play out. But they certainly are doing a very well-planned, very strategic, very well-funded strategy throughout all of Europe to undermine democracy. And the Russian propaganda, the sophistication of it, the way they're using television, radio, it's astounding, and I think most Americans don't understand. And we really need to have a strategy to combat it. As a representative of Fort Bragg, which is one of the great honors of my life, I understand the threats we face. And I was fortunate to spend Wednesday down at Fort Bragg. I know, Senator, you were down there this week as well, with some of the most patriotic, greatest Americans we've ever produced, but also understanding the real threats that we face. It's an honor to represent the tip of the spear, some of these folks that live right here in North Carolina, but we also need to recognize what the real threats are they're facing, what the challenges are, what they need to combat that. I don't ever want our folks to be in a fair fight. As Senator Tillis talked about, whether it's the technological advantages of our military, whether it's rules of engagement, but also the soft power, and are we doing the things we need to do to support our allies overseas? We find ourselves in these trying times really as a direct result of years of the Obama administration's feckless foreign policy, from legitimizing Iran's quest for nuclear capabilities to failing to hold Syrian President Bashar al-Assad accountable for crossing that red line, to refusing to even name the enemy for what it is. The Obama administration created this new term. I've learned all these new terms since I got to Washington, but the idea that we would lead from behind, what a ridiculous concept. But the hands-off approach from President Obama and his administration did nothing but make the world less safe, while creating doubts about America's strength and resolve. Throughout the world, a lack of U.S. leadership created power vacuums that were filled by adversaries, rogue regimes, and terrorist groups. But the good news is that America has reasserted its influence and leadership on the world stage. Our allies have welcomed this renewal. If you've had a chance to talk to folks from other countries, from other governments, they said, "Where's America been? We need your leadership." They may complain about us at times and our involvement, but they desperately need it and recognize the need for it. As I look around the room, I see a lot of bright minds here, a lot of people who've put a lot more thought into this and some of these topics, and undoubtedly have great ideas of how we tackle these challenges as we reassert the United States' role in the 21st century and on the global stage. And I'm happy to share a little bit of my vision with you, but I look forward to hearing from others. Getting back to Senator Helms, Helms had three principles when it came to foreign policy. Number one, it must protect our national security. Number two, it must promote a strong national defense. And number three, pursue a moral foreign policy. And so I think we got to keep that in mind as we look forward. I think the first step to truly reforming our foreign policy is strengthening the national security and securing our homeland, something Senator Tillis and I also agree. And number one, we've got to secure our border and enforce our immigration laws. This is not an immigration issue. This is a national security issue. And although I did not support ultimately the recent omnibus bill for a lot of reasons we can get into in Q&A if you want, but one of the things is that I was pleased to see in that bill was an increase in funding for border security. And obviously we've got to improve the tools at the border, and we can decide how we're going to move forward. I agree with, I've heard Senator Tillis talk about this. I don't believe we're going to necessarily have a 2,000-foot concrete wall that looks the same the whole way across, and that may not necessarily be what we need to do. But we do need an ocean-to-ocean border strategy for that southern border. We need to stop throwing resources at this sector because it's busy, and then when that stops and they go somewhere else, then we throw resources at that sector. We need to decide what is it going to take. And, in those desert areas of Arizona, where we've got, we need to have aerial surveillance and we need to have rapid response. We don't necessarily need a robust wall there, because when I was touring, I asked the Border Patrol person who was showing me, I said, how long would it take if you cross this border before you get to a road or civilization? How long do you have to pick somebody up? He said 36 hours. So 36 hours of barren, rough, rugged, desert-like terrain. Maybe we need something else there. And so I think it's important that we look at it in a comprehensive way. Number two, we must defeat terrorists while also keeping them out of America. President Trump is working to strengthen the vetting of refugees. It's been so frustrating to watch a judge out in Hawaii or wherever they are out there in the left coast saying that the president doesn't have the authority that Congress gave the president in writing. I don't know how it could be more explicit. Many of you know that I wrote the legislation that passed last Congress out of the House dealing with the refugee issue. We got a 2/3 veto-proof vote out of the House on common sense legislation that simply said, if we don't know who you are, you can't come into this country. And until we can figure out who you are and know that you're not a threat, at that point we'll let you in through the refugee programs. Not a really radical concept, not a cold-hearted concept. No, we were not interested in stopping all immigration, but we've got to use common sense. As Senator Tillis said, there's active investigations right now by the FBI of people that came in as refugees that we believe could be terrorists. There's been some high-profile incidents over the last couple of years of folks who came here as refugees who then acted out terrorist acts, or we caught them right before they did. The threat is real. And frankly, when ISIS says they're going to use the refugee program to come here and kill us, I take them at their word. And we're foolish if we don't. The third thing is we must give our men and women in uniform the tools they need to take the fight to the enemy where they live and to win that fight. And often, when I first got to Congress, I always thought I was a defense hawk, pro-defense person, pro-military. But then I found I'm kind of a budget hawk too, because as you start looking at these issues, as I said to the Fayetteville newspaper the other day, I'm very concerned about the defense budget next year. But I'm really concerned about the defense budget in 10 years when we spend as much on the interest of our national debt as we spend on all of military expenditures. Think about that. Or how about in 20 years when we spend as much on interest on the debt as we're going to spend on everything else the federal government spends money on? Think about that. That's scary. And in that world, how do we continue to provide innovative tools for our men and women in uniform? How do we continue to fund the things they need to do? How do we continue to fund priorities? So I think a big part of this, too, is we've got to deal with our national debt issue. And that means Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. All three programs are on a path to going broke. And that's actually something Republicans and Democrats agree on. In Washington, we agree all three are going broke. We actually agree on the date they're going broke. But the attitude in Washington, I know this is one of the frustrations Tom felt when he first got up there, is, that crisis, that's 8 or 9 years away. We can put that off till next year. And that's the most frustrating thing about representing you in Congress is my mentality is you see a problem, let's go solve it. And I may not get everything I want, but we're going to solve this problem and we're going to do it for the American people. But the attitude in Washington is, we can put that off. That huge calamity, that's years off. Let's not deal with it now. But every year you wait, it gets more expensive. And, and these issues used to be important to me 2 years ago, but now they're really important that I have a 19-month-old son. And I think about the fact that what we're doing is I'm running up my credit card that I took out in his name, and I'm going to leave him to pay the bill. And that's what we're doing right now with the federal government. So the debt is also a national security issue, and it's something we've got to tackle. Senator Tillis and I both serve on the Helsinki Commission, which has an incredible history of human rights reforms, really laid the groundwork for a lot of the revolutions that occurred in Europe. throwing back the Iron Curtain, and we're still working on security issues, human rights issues. I'm very focused on anti-Semitism in Europe, and religious liberty, which is under attack every day. But another issue that I'm really passionate about is something I was glad to hear you talk about, Senator. We need to talk about more. Is I want the United States to be the #1 supplier of natural gas to Europe, because exactly what Tom Tillis said, it creates jobs here, tremendous jobs here. It creates economic activity here. It provides a safe supply of natural gas to Europe. It will improve our relationships with those European nations when we do more business together, and it will absolutely undercut Vladimir Putin, and it will gut the Russian economy. And so the geopolitical importance of it is almost as important as all the other things. So that is a high priority of mine. I was meeting with some business guys in Houston 2.5 years ago talking about this issue of natural gas, and they said we can't get any help out of the administration on marketing our natural gas in Europe. Commerce won't help us, state won't help us. And so I happened to be traveling that following August in Europe, and every country I met with, the ambassador would brief us, give us kind of an overview of what's going on in the country. Every briefing included something to do with Russia, natural gas, the influence they had over the country. And every ambassador I asked, well, I proposed this. Why don't we have America be the supplier of natural gas? And every ambassador but one, these were all President Obama's ambassadors, said, oh, we could never do that. We could never be the supplier of natural gas here. And it was some combination of answers of, everything needs to be run off windmills to, there's no infrastructure, it'd be too expensive to build it. But it's ridiculous. And so I've run into that in the last administration over and over, this resistance to market American energy. That's not true in the new administration. And so I believe we can have real success now. And so I look forward to working with you on that. I think that'll be great for us. On trade, the topic of trade. This is another important area where I think we can look to Senator Helms' wisdom. President Trump has said in both foreign policy and trade that his driving principle is going to be America first. Well, I agree with that notion. But for North Carolina manufacturers and for our agriculture industry here, our #1 industry in the state, we need foreign markets. We need trade agreements that help tear down barriers for North Carolina businesses and create more opportunities and good-paying jobs here at home, but we've got to be smart about it. I believe in trade, which I think is the position we as conservatives ought to have. I've been troubled that over the last several years, conservatives in Washington have turned anti-trade. And I think that is not philosophically where we ought to be. And I think we've got to be very careful about that. And I hope there'll be some good, robust discussion about that today. But I have seen the effects of bad trade deals. I represent a congressional district that's lost more jobs, more textile jobs in the last decade or so than anywhere else in the country. And Senator Helms said, in order for there to be free trade, there must be fair trade. And so I believe that 100%. Too often in the past when we would negotiate a trade deal with another country, textiles seems to be the chip that got thrown in the pot to sweeten it at the beginning. Why is that? Well, part of it is the textile lobby in the past had always been against any trade deal. They would just start out and say, we're opposed, and if you mess with us, we're going to be really opposed. That's what they would say to the U.S. trade rep. That's not a very strong position to be in. The other thing is most countries of the world have a textile industry because it doesn't take a lot of technology to be in textiles, to grow fiber and to produce textiles. And so it was something that every country in the world wanted. And so too often in the past, I think we sold out textiles early on. And I've seen a change in that. I've seen the textile companies that are left working in a smarter way, saying we will support trade as long as you don't, you leave in place protections we've got, or you leave in place the deals that have been cut. And I think we can make good progress, and we can do this in a smart way. Again, that opens the markets without opening the door for China to destroy what's left of our textile industry. And so I very much believe that we can do this in a smart way, that we can have fair trade. But there's been some real problems in the last couple of trade deals that have been negotiated. You look at Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's a lot of reasons why it was important to get that right. China right now is driving trade in the Pacific. They're sort of writing the rules. I want America to write the trade rules. I want us to set the guidelines of how trade's going to be done in Asia. And there are tremendous potential trading partners there. But there's a couple problems with the TPP. One is there was a political decision driven by Australia and New Zealand, but I think colluded along with by our trade representative to discriminate against tobacco, which would have a huge impact on North Carolina's economy. The TPP singled out tobacco and said you can't have the legal protection that all other commodities have. And that's bad for our state, but it's also a bad precedent for future trade deals. What if the next president wanted to discriminate against some other commodity for some other reason? It's just a bad precedent. And so it's something that I would have opposed the bill over in and of itself. The other problem with TPP is we have a huge pharmaceutical industry here, and there was a real problems with how we treated the pharmaceutical industry's intellectual property. And so it would have been very damaging for our state. So I had real concerns with TPP, but I was sorry to see that we seem to be starting over. But it may be that the future for trade for the United States is bilateral trade. Maybe these big deals, maybe they're too complicated. So I don't know the answer, but I just sort of throw that out there, and I imagine that'll be discussed today. But I do know this: in a world where Mexico has more trade agreements than the United States, where businesses in Mexico have better deals around the world and more deals than we have businesses in this country, that's not where we want to be. And so we've got to do a better job on the trade front of making sure we have fair trade, making sure that we're negotiating deals that are good for American business and good for our allies and our relationships when it comes to national security as well. But I remain hopeful that we can get this right, and we just got to be very vocal about it as we work with this administration. As they say, actions have consequences, and so does inaction. And we've clearly seen in the past that inaction from the last administration has created uncertainty in the world. It's created real problems for our economy. Looking back at that red line in the sand that was crossed. But as I said before, we're in a new situation. This year when the Assad regime used gas on their people, President Trump responded very decisively. With a strong response. I think that on the heels of him using the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, making the decision to listen to the commanders in the field and what they say they need rather than making political decisions, I think it sent a strong message. I know it sent a strong message to our men and women in uniform that they now have a commander-in-chief who respects them and is willing to listen to them. But I think it also sent a strong signal to our enemies that no longer are we going to sit back and accept and certainly not reward bad behavior. And so, and I've also been very impressed with the president and what he's done in negotiating with China to get them to engage with North Korea in a way they've never done before. And so I do think the future's bright. I do think that we can make strong advances for this country if we adhere to the principles that Senator Helms stood for and advocated so effectively. And so, I'll just leave you with that. And I'll just say I look forward to any questions. Mark Walker's already said if there are any tough questions, he's happy to answer them for you. But thank you all sincerely for your support of the Helms Center. It's really important, and thank you for the support for all of us. God bless you.
Thank you, Richard.
I think we're running kind of tight, but Senator Tillis, would you come up here? I think we could take one or two questions to each of our special guests here, and I'll just stand over here and moderate. Would you have any questions from our guests?
Put them to sleep, Tom.
And
Lewis.
Yeah. So, help me with the 51 Senate.
Oh, the nuclear option.
Nuclear option. Why? I mean, my opinion is it's going to happen to us if we get control.
The question from Lewis, there's talk about the nuclear option, which would be using a device similar to what Harry Reid did to change the rules, to break the rules, to change the rules, to change the executive calendar. There are two types of calendars in the Senate. There's the executive calendar, there's the legislative calendar. Senator Reid objected to the ruling of the chair and basically changed the rules and caused all of these nominations. Thank you very much, Senator Reid, because that's how we got Neil Gorsuch. But, well, how we got it by him doing it for everything but Supreme Court justices, we decided to complete his work, and I'm sure he's proud of that. So what we did was set, and let me tell you why I was okay with that. So because people are going to say there's an inherent conflict between me being opposed to the nuclear filibuster for legislation while I supported it for the executive calendar. For 214 years, we had not filibustered a Supreme Court justice. In 2003, Chuck Schumer decided to present this concept of maybe we should start standing in the way of George W. Bush's nominations. 214 years. Bork, he was kind of controversial for those of you old enough to remember those confirmations. He lost on the floor, 52-48, but he got a vote. Clarence Thomas got a vote and got confirmed by about the same margin, only in the other direction. But Schumer decided that they were going to start filibustering judicial nominations that had not happened for 214 years. So all we did by codifying the remainder of the executive calendar back to that simple majority was to do what had been practiced since the founding of this country. Now, let's talk about the legislative filibuster. There are certain traditions in the Senate that I think that we should rethink, because there are things that occurred over time after the Founding Fathers were long gone that sometimes had to do with deals, sometimes had to do with creating, good relations. I don't know the context of all of them, but there were things that happened, but they weren't things that the Founding Fathers opined on. The Founding Fathers opined on making it more difficult to get things out of the U.S. Senate. They opined on taking this diverse, raucous group of House members and let them just go crazy. That's why I like going over to the House chamber, because it's fun there. We're a little state and conservative. But the George Washington was the one who said that the Senate, the House was that hot cup of tea into which it would spill into the saucer and cool down in the Senate. It was to not let populism and the popular passions of the American electorate dictate something as profound as the future trajectory of the United States. So I got a little bit of passion around this. And I'll tell you another reason. So let's say I had none of that passion. Let's say it's not something that I could point to several papers written by our founding fathers who thought that that structure was important, that distinction was important. I go back to what I was saying earlier. It needs to be endured. Imagine what would happen to this country, this economy, to long-term planning if you thought you were only 2 years away from changing the fundamental trajectory of this country. In other words, you could have huge swings based on the outcome of an election. So you're a businessman. How would you like to go to something where bad things happen, but not big bad things frequently? When you get to that simple majority, big bad things could potentially happen. And what does business do in the face of uncertainty? They take fewer risk. So it's fundamental to that concept of providing some sort of stability. It is hard, and it's frustrating, but it's foundational to the institution that the Founding Fathers created. And I know I'm probably at odds with at least half or more of the people in the room. But I'm a steward of the U.S. Senate. And I'm a steward not of these deals that were worked out amongst people long after the passing of the Founding Fathers, but of what was fundamental to this unique institution among democratic institutions that have ever existed. And I think something as an institutionalist that's important for us to think about. Then I'll leave you the practical matter. There have been 3 times over the last 100 years where the Democrats have had supermajorities, could do whatever they wanted to do. You know what they did? The New Deal, the Great Society, and Obamacare. Do we want to have the potential of those kinds of swings every 2 years? I haven't thought about it much, Lewis, but off the top of my head, that's what I think.
We have a question for Congressman Hudson. Anyone?
Sue.
Yes, sir.
Question, it started with something that Senator Tillis said, but Representative Hudson, how rapidly can we use energy policy to defund our enemies abroad?
Well, some of it's going to take time. For example, there are 2 import terminals for liquefied natural gas in Europe, one in Croatia and one in the Baltic Sea. But there's not necessarily that network of infrastructure to get from there to all the countries. And so that may take some time and some investment. But Italy, for example, and by the way, that was the one ambassador that was interested and was surprised that our companies weren't getting help. And I put in touch with some of the companies in Houston. They've already started building an infrastructure to get from that Croatian terminal into Italy. In fact, they've got it all done but one section that goes through some kind of a old cemetery or something. They're working through how to do that, but they're already a little forward looking in it. But it's going to take investment in infrastructure in Europe. But I don't think that's insurmountable. And I think obviously the sooner we start, the sooner we get there. I do think once we start having these discussions, but certainly once we start cutting these deals, that in of itself is going to have an impact on Russia, right? And maybe competition will even work with Russia. Maybe it'll modify their behavior because they realize the competition's coming. So I think some of the impact will be immediate. I think at what point are we going to start sending tankers in a nonstop stream? That may be a few years off.
Well, you just think about it structurally, long-term energy positions. So take a look at futures. The minute we pass definitive regulations and any other enabling laws to allow this platform to get created, that's when Russia starts getting affected. And hopefully it's in a peaceful way to where they just come into the community of nations and fuel their economy and end their aggression. This isn't about defeating Russia. This is about having them live within their borders and respecting the borders of other nations. But I think just if you take a look at the long-term economic impact, if we get these projects going, if you get permitting moving again, if you gen up some of the extraction facilities that have been quiesced with the changes in the market, changes in the regulatory environment here, you start having an impact over time that just ramps up.
Thank you very much, Senator and Congressman.